My client's mother is no longer capable of making sound decisions, the lawyer said, and I watched my son-in-law's hand tighten on the back of his chair like he was bracing for impact. Smart man, he just didn't know the impact was coming for him. I sat in the third row of that probate courtroom in Columbus, and I didn't say a word. I'd stopped looking at the clock by then. I already knew how much time was left. About 11 minutes, give or take, before the man who married my daughter learned exactly who he'd spent the last 4 years lying to. Let me ask you something before I go on. Have you ever sat across from family, real family, blood or marriage, and watched them describe a version of you that doesn't exist, just so they can take something that's yours? If you have, you already know that the worst part isn't the lie. It's the little smile they give afterward, like they've won. Drop a comment if you know that smile. I want to know how many of us recognize it. My name doesn't matter much for this. What matters is that I'm 61, I was widowed at 58, and the morning my husband's heart gave out in our kitchen, my son-in-law was already calculating. I just didn't see it yet. His name is Theron. He calls himself an investor, which is what people call themselves when they've never built anything but want the respect of those who have. He married my daughter, Raina, in a vineyard ceremony that cost more than my first house, and he paid for exactly none of it. We did, my husband and I, and Theron toasted us that night, raised the glass of wine we bought, and said something about family being the only investment that never depreciates. People clapped. I should have heard the word investment and run. So there I was, in that courtroom, listed on the petition as the respondent. The woman whose own son-in-law was asking a judge to declare her mentally incompetent and hand him control of her finances. He brought witnesses, he'd brought a binder. He'd brought my sister, who sat 2 seats down from me with her chin lifted like she was doing me a kindness by showing up to watch me get dismantled. Mrs. The judge glanced at her papers. The petitioner alleges a pattern of erratic financial behavior, missed payments, confusion regarding your own assets, and several large unexplained withdrawals over the past 18 months. He's asking the court to appoint him as conservator. Do you understand what's being requested? I understand completely, Your Honor, I said. Theron leaned forward. I caught it from the corner of my eye. He wanted me to crack. He'd spent 4 years studying me the way a man studies a house he intends to flip, looking for the soft spots, the rot, the places he could push. He thought he knew exactly where I'd give. What he didn't know was that I'd spent 18 months studying him right back. I want to take you back, because the courtroom is the ending and you deserve the middle. After my husband died, I was a mess. I'll own that. I'd forget to eat. I'd find myself standing in the garage at 2 in the morning with no memory of walking out there. Grief does that. It hollows you out and leaves the lights on so everyone thinks somebody's still home. Theron noticed. Of course he did. He started coming around more. Just checking on you, he'd say, bringing a casserole his housekeeper made, sitting at my kitchen table flipping through my mail. Want me to handle this? You shouldn't have to think about bills right now. And I let him. God help me, I let him, because I was tired and he was familiar, and Raina kept telling me how lucky we were to have a man around who understood money. He had me sign things. A few at a time, always tucked between condolence cards and grocery receipts. This just lets me pay the utilities so they don't shut off your power, Mom. He called me Mom. I'd never told him he could. One of those papers was a limited power of attorney. I knew that much. What I didn't know was that the version he slid in front of me 8 months later, the one he said was the same thing, just renewed, was not the same thing at all. It was broad. It was sweeping. It gave him access to accounts I'd never mentioned to him. Here's where the story would normally turn into me being a victim. It doesn't. Because somewhere around the 4-month mark, the fog started to lift, the way it does, in patches, and one Tuesday I sat down to write a thank you note and I noticed something. The checkbook balance in my own handwriting didn't match the statement. $1,100 off, not a fortune. But I'd been a bookkeeper for 22 years before I retired, and the thing about numbers is they don't lie even when everyone around you does. So I did what any grieving widow would do. I pretended I hadn't noticed. I smiled. I thanked Theron for handling everything, and that night, after he left, I made myself a cup of coffee and I started a new ledger, a private one, the kind I used to keep for the company, except this time, the company was my own life, and the embezzler was sitting at my dinner table calling me Mom. I'm going to tell you something that took me a long time to understand, so stay with me. When someone is stealing from you, your instinct is to stop them, slam the door, change the locks, confront them. And that instinct is exactly what they're counting on. Because a confrontation is a conversation, and a conversation can be denied, twisted, blamed on your grief, your age, your confusion. I'd have screamed, and he'd have turned to my daughter and said, "See? See how unstable she's gotten?" And she'd have believed him, because she already half did. So I didn't slam any doors, I went quiet, I went still, I became the most boring, agreeable, easily managed widow you ever met. I let him think the lights were off and nobody was home, and I watched everything. I learned which days he moved money. I learned he was funneling it through an LLC he'd registered in Delaware under a name that sounded like a real estate fund and was, in fact, just Theron with a checking account. I learned he was $300,000 underwater on a development deal in Cincinnati that had collapsed, that the vineyard wedding and the lease on the German SUV and the boat he docked at Buckeye Lake were all running on fumes and other people's money, mostly mine. But the smartest thing I did, the thing I'm proudest of, is that I went and got my own people. Quietly. A lawyer who specialized in elder financial abuse, a woman who took one look at my private ledger and got very still and said, "Ma'am, do not change a single thing about how you're behaving." Not yet. And a forensic accountant who, for a fee I paid in cash so it wouldn't show, started building a map. That word matters. A map. Hold on to it. While Theron thought he was draining a confused old woman, I was sitting in a strip mall law office every other Thursday, building a case so airtight that a judge wouldn't just see theft, he'd see a campaign. Now back to the courtroom. "Look at the evidence, Your Honor," Theron's lawyer said, and the bailiff carried a thick binder to the bench. Missed mortgage payments, overdraft notices, a pattern of withdrawals my client's mother-in-law cannot account for. Frankly, she's been victimized, possibly by someone outside the family, and she's too diminished to even realize it. We're asking the court to protect her from herself. It was good. I'll give him that. He'd framed his own theft as my decline. The missed payments were ones he'd stopped paying so they'd show up red. The withdrawals were his. And the someone outside the family was the most beautiful part because it gave the court a villain that wasn't him. My sister sniffled on cue. Raina wouldn't look at me. She sat behind her husband with her hands folded, and I felt that one. I won't pretend I didn't. That's my baby. I carried her. And she'd decided, somewhere along the way, that I was the problem. "Mrs." The judge said, "Your son-in-law has submitted substantial documentation. Do you have a response to these allegations of financial mismanagement?" The whole room leaned in for me to fall apart. I stood up slowly. My knees aren't what they were. I smoothed my cardigan. I'd worn the plain one on purpose, the one that made me look exactly as harmless as they needed me to be, and I picked up a slim folder I'd set on the table when I walked in. "I don't have a response, Your Honor," I said. "I have a record." I walked it to the bench. Took my time. I've watched a lot of courtroom shows in my widowhood, and the one thing they get right is that you never rush the moment you've waited 18 months for. "My son-in-law is correct that money left my accounts," I said, turning just enough to face the gallery, to face Raina. "Roughly $412,000 over 18 months. He's correct that I watched it go. Where he's mistaken is in thinking I didn't know where it went." Theron laughed. Actually laughed, that barkmen do when they're scared. "Your Honor, this is exactly the kind of paranoid. That first page," I said over him, calm as a Sunday, "is a transaction log. Every withdrawal, every wire, every transfer out of my accounts for the past 18 months. The second page is a list of where that money went. You'll notice it didn't go to a mysterious stranger. It went to an entity called Meridian Holdings, LLC, registered in Delaware on the 9th of March 2 years ago. The registered agent is my son-in-law, Theron. The account it feeds is at a credit union in Cincinnati in his name and his name alone. The judge turned a page. Her eyebrows did the thing eyebrows do when paper starts talking. That's fabricated, Theron said, but his voice had gone up half an octave. She doesn't even understand how banking works. The third page, I continued, is the IP and device record for the online sessions that authorized those transfers. The bank pulled them under subpoena 3 weeks ago. Every single one came from a laptop and a home network registered to an address on Dorset Lane. That's not my house, Your Honor. That's his. The gallery made a sound. You know the one. Air leaving a room. Raina finally looked at me, and I watched something I'll remember until I die. I watched my daughter start to do the math. "Mom," she said, barely a whisper. "Not yet, sweetheart," I said, gentle, because she was still my baby even now. "Let me finish." The judge held up a hand. "Mrs., I have to ask, if you knew 18 months ago that funds were being misappropriated, why on earth did you allow it to continue? Why not report it immediately? Why not freeze your accounts?" This was the question. The honest one. The one half of you watching are asking right now, the same way the people in my own life would ask it later. Let me answer it the way I answered the judge, because it's the only part of this that I need you to understand. Because, Your Honor, 18 months ago, I had a confused widow's word against a successful man's paperwork. If I'd stopped him at $1,100, it would have been a misunderstanding. If I'd stopped him at $20,000, it would have been a family dispute, handled quietly, and he'd have apologized and been back inside my life by Thanksgiving. I didn't want him caught. I wanted him stopped. There's a difference, and the difference is permanent. I set the next page on the bench myself. Under Ohio law, financial exploitation of an elder is a felony. The degree depends on the dollar amount. I am 61. I qualify as a protected adult under the statute. And once the total he stole crossed $150,000, this stopped being a family matter and became a felony of the third degree, with the kind of prison time that doesn't come with a payment plan. I let that sit. I let it cross, on purpose. I let him bury himself one wire at a time, and I kept the receipts. Theron was no longer laughing. He was looking at his own lawyer, who had slid a few inches away from him in his chair, the way you slide away from a man who's just realized the floor is gone. He thought the missing money proved I was incompetent, I said. It was never proof of my decline, Your Honor. It was bait, and he took every dollar of it. A trapped man is a dangerous man, and Theron had one card left. He reached into his briefcase with a hand I could see shaking from 20 feet and pulled out a single sheet. "She signed this," he said, loud, desperate, turning to the room because the room was the only jury he had left. "Full power of attorney, notarized, 2 years ago. She gave me authority over those accounts. Every transfer was authorized. She's not a victim. She's a liar who forgot what she signed." He handed it up. The judge read it, frowned. "Mrs., is this your signature?" I looked at it. I remembered the night he'd put it in front of me, between a sympathy card from my late husband's poker buddies and a coupon for carpet cleaning. I'd signed without reading. The single biggest mistake I made in all of this. "It looks like my signature," I said. Theron's whole body uncoiled with relief. There it is. The whole case is built on her not remembering." "It does look like my signature," I said again. "Which is impressive, Your Honor, considering that document is dated the 14th of June. And on the 14th of June 2 years ago, I was in a recovery room at Riverside Methodist Hospital, coming out of anesthesia from a knee replacement. I was not signing legal documents. I have the surgical records, the anesthesiologist's log, and a very nice nurse named in the discharge paperwork who is, conveniently, willing to testify." I laid the hospital records on the bench next to the forged POA. "That signature wasn't renewed, Your Honor. It was forged, and forging a notarized power of attorney to seize an elder's assets isn't conservatorship. It's a separate felony all on its own. The notary's name was on the document, too. I watched the judge read it, and I'll tell you a small thing I enjoyed. I knew that notary. She'd processed a deed for me years back. I had a feeling she'd be very interested to explain to investigators how her stamp ended up on a document for a surgery patient who was unconscious 3 counties away. Theron stood up. I don't think he meant to. I think his legs just did it. Raina, he said, turning to my daughter. Raina, tell them. Tell them she's been confused. Tell them. And my daughter, my baby, the one I carried, stood up too. She looked at the binder. She looked at the hospital records. She looked at the minder she'd married, telling her to lie to a judge for him. You said she missed the payments, Raina said, very quietly. You told me she forgot to pay the mortgage. You told me she was getting bad. I believed you. I let you do this because you told me. Her voice cracked. Whose laptop, Theron? Whose house? He didn't answer. There's no answer to that. The math was done. The judge set down her pen. I'm going to be very direct, she said. There is no basis for a conservatorship here. The respondent has demonstrated more financial competence than most attorneys who appear in this room. A few people laughed. I didn't. What I'm looking at instead is documented felony exploitation of an elderly adult and an apparently forged, notarized instrument. This court is denying the petition in full, and I'll be referring this matter to the county prosecutor's office this afternoon. I'd love to tell you Theron was dragged out in cuffs right there. Real life is slower than that. But I'd called the prosecutor's office myself the week before, on the advice of my strip mall lawyer. And let's just say there were 2 people sitting in the back of that courtroom who weren't there for a probate hearing. They followed him into the hallway. I heard the words, "Do you have a moment?" to the door. And I have never in my life enjoyed a sentence more. Here's the part nobody tells you about winning. It's quiet. There's no music. I gathered my folders. I thanked the judge. And I walked out into a gray Columbus afternoon that smelled like rain coming. My sister tried to talk to me at the elevator. I let her. I didn't say much. There's nothing left to say to someone who showed up to watch you lose. Raina caught me in the parking garage. She was crying the ugly way, the way she did when she was 4. Mom, I'm so sorry. I should have known. I should have asked you. I let him put a wall between us, and I'm so sorry. And here's where you might want me to be cold. To tell her, she made her bed. I thought about it. I'd had 18 lonely months to think about it, but I didn't lose my husband and my daughter both. I'd already buried one person I loved. I wasn't going to bury another over a man who'd be wearing a number by spring. He was good at it, I told her. That's the thing about people like him. They're not clumsy. He fooled a smart woman. He fooled me for 4 months. I touched her face. Come home, we'll figure out the rest. The money, in case you're wondering, came back. Most of it. The LLC got frozen, the boat got sold, the German SUV got repossessed in the most satisfying way I'd ever witnessed from a kitchen window. The forgery charge stacked on the exploitation charge, and Theron's investor friends evaporated like they always do when the checks stop clearing. He took a plea. He's somewhere upstate now, learning that prison commissary doesn't take vineyard credit. I never did get an apology from my sister. I've made my peace with that too. People ask me how I stayed so calm in that courtroom. They think it was strength. It wasn't. It was 18 months of grief turned slowly, carefully, into something useful. Grief is just love with nowhere to go. I gave mine somewhere to go. I gave it a ledger and a lawyer and a forensic accountant and a folder I set on a table and waited 1.5 years to open. If someone is sitting at your table calling you a name you never gave them permission to use, watch their hands. Watch what they sign and watch what they want you to sign. And if your gut tells you something is $1,100 off, believe it. Believe it the first time. I'm 61. I sleep through the night now. My daughter calls every Sunday, and somewhere in a state facility, A man who once raised a glass and called family an investment that never depreciates is learning that some investments come due all at once. He wanted to manage my decline. He should have asked himself why I was so calm. The quiet ones aren't broken. Sometimes the quiet ones are just counting. The $1,100 is what I keep coming back to, not the 400,000. The 1,100. Because that small number was the whole thing in miniature, the moment the fog lifted just enough for me to see, and I had to decide what kind of woman I was going to be about it. Thurin didn't end up in a state facility because the universe balanced a scale for me. He ended up there because of choices, one stacked on the next, his and mine both. He chose to mistake my grief for stupidity. He chose to call me mom while emptying my accounts. And every choice left a fingerprint, a wire transfer, an IP address, a forged date on a day I was unconscious in a recovery room. People who do harm always believe they're the exception, that they're too smart to leave a trail. They never are. What goes out into the world comes back wearing your own handwriting. But I want to be honest about the parts that were mine to control, because that's where the real lesson lives. The first was simply refusing to become a liar to fight a liar. I never falsified a single document. I let his own paper convict him. There's a kind of strength in keeping your hands clean even when filthy hands would be faster, and I needed every ounce of it. The second was patience that looked, from the outside, like weakness. Anyone watching would have said I was a confused widow letting a man rob her blind. 18 months of that. 18 months of smiling at the man at my dinner table while I built a case in a strip mall law office every other Thursday. That's not passivity, that's discipline. The clever move and the satisfying move are almost never the same move, and learning to want the clever one over the satisfying one is the work of a lifetime. And the third was endurance, plain and unglamorous. There were nights I wanted to scream the truth across the kitchen, nights I missed my husband so badly I'd have signed anything just to feel managed and safe again. I didn't quit on the long, quiet plan. Grief is just love with nowhere to go, and I decided to give mine somewhere useful to go instead of letting it hollow me out. I forgave Raina because punishing her would only have proven Theron right, that our family was a thing to be broken and walked away from. I didn't forgive my sister, and I stopped apologizing for that distinction. Forgiveness is an ode to everyone who shows up at the elevator. If you take anything from my long, strange year and a half, let it be this. Believe your gut the first time it tells you something is off. Keep your integrity even when it costs you speed, and don't mistake a calm person for a defeated one. The quiet ones aren't broken. Sometimes the quiet ones are just counting,